Hope you all have a good day. In last class, we discussed about the French Revolution and the idea of nation. Today, we are going to learn about the making of nationalism in Europe. Before that, we must recap where did the idea of nationalism come from? Well, the idea of nationalism and the nation state comes from French Revolution. These ideas spread from France to the other parts of Europe as well. So, we have understood so far that the notion of nation state did not exist in the mid 18th century. The nation state that we know today, like Germany, Italy, or Switzerland, were all divided by kingdoms and duchies, which were ruled by rulers who had their autonomous territories. The people who were living in those autonomous territories were of diverse nature. They spoke different language and they belonged to ethnic group. Conclusion, they did not share any collective identity or common culture. Let's see an example. Austria-Hungary was ruled by the Habsburg Empire. Austria-Hungary consisted of different region and different people. So, we will see in the map that it had German speaking population in the Alpine region, it had Italy speaking provinces, and in Hungary it had Magyar speaking population, and in the other half used to speak other dialects too. Whereas in Galicia, the aristocrats spoke Polish. Aristocrats are people who hold power or enjoy certain privileges due to their noble birth. And because of these feudal privileges, the situation was hostile. And under this scenario, there were no political unity. So, the only reason the people living together was they were bound by the allegiance to the emperor. And yet, nationalism emerged in Europe and the idea of nation state emerged. Now, the question is how. So, we will see how in the upcoming topics. The first and the foremost reason for the abolition of aristocracy and the rise of the new middle class. As I have already told you, Europe used to have aristocrats and they were considered as the dominant class of the society. They used to control vast estates of land. Farming and landholding was typically done by tenants and serfs. So, the fact of the matter is that the aristocrats were small in group while the majority of the people were peasants. Yet, the aristocrats were the dominant one. The reason for their dominance was because they had strong connection among them and they were united by their common way of living, and that common way of life that the aristocrats used to have spread beyond the regions. It was not as if it is restricted to only one region, and they used to have common language too. French was that common language. French was used in diplomacy as well as in high societies. These aristocrat families were connected by their ties of marriage, and all of this helped them to be connected to each other, which made them very powerful. In the 19th century, in Western and Central Europe, industrialization emerged. Now, we all know Industrial Revolution happened in England in the second half of 18th century. But in Western and Central Europe, it only came in the 19th century. And because of the Industrial Revolution, it saw the growth in trade and growth in town, which resulted in the emergence of commercial classes, as it also resulted in the formation of new social groups. Now, they belong to working class and middle class, which consisted of industrialists, businessmen, professionals, etc. Well, the middle class people were smaller in number till late 19th century, but it was among the educated liberal middle class that the idea of national unity emerged, which led to the challenging of dominance of aristocrats and the abolition of privileges that aristocrats had. The idea of national unity was linked to the concept of liberalism. Now, what is liberalism? Liberalism is an ideology which advocates for freedom and liberty. The middle class people strongly advocated for individual freedom and equality of all before the law. They talked about the concept of government by consent. It means that they talked about making of constitution and the representative government through the parliament. This concept had emerged from the French Revolution of 18th century. Liberalism talked about the end of aristocracy and of clerical privileges. And in the 19th century, European liberals also talked about inviolability of private property. This means that the ownership of private property should be unchallenged and it should be absolute. They talked about equality before law, but the concept of universal suffrage did not exist yet. So, women and non-propertied men were excluded during the French Revolution. The right to vote was only given to propertied men. Even in Napoleonic code, women were considered as minors. So, these non-propertied men and women fought against this and demanded for equal political rights. This is also the period when the economic liberalism arose. The emerging middle class people demanded freedom of market and abolition of state imposed restrictions, as we are facing many challenges. For example, in the first half of 19th century, in the German speaking regions, there used to be countless principalities and they used to have different currencies and different standards for weights and measurements. If merchants wanted to sell their goods across regions, they used to face many custom barriers. Those customs were imposed on the basics of weights as the standard for weights and measurements were different. It was a long time consuming process. So, in the year 1834, custom union was formed in Prussia, which was later joined by many German states, and they were successful in getting tariff barrier abolished. Also, the railway enhanced the mobility of the people for economic interest, which led to the sense of national unification. That economic nationalism boosted wider nationalist sentiments. After 1815, Europe saw the sense of liberal nationalism getting suppressed by new kind of conservatism. Conservatism is a notion that traditional institution of a state like monarchical form of government, the authority of church and other traditional practices should be preserved. But they did not mean they wanted to go back to the land of society they had before the revolution. In fact, that the autocratic monarch could be even more strengthened because of the modernization. They believed that they could make a modern army, efficient bureaucracy with the help of modernization. The estates could be made even more powerful. So, this was the kind of conservatism that emerged. This conservatism was the result of defeat of Napoleon in the year 1815 in the Battle of Waterloo. The European government wanted to undo all the changes that Napoleon had done. So, in the year 1815, the Treaty of Vienna was signed and the French lost its territory. Bourbon dynasty was restored to power and it was all done to prevent for the French expansion further. This was done to restore the monarchy and to create a new conservative autocratic order in Europe. But in the new conservative era, criticism and dissent was not tolerated at all, and any activity which questions the legitimacy of the autocratic government was scrubbed. Now, just the censorship law were made and it was used to control the newspaper, book, plays, and song. In short, anything that highlighted the idea of liberty from French Revolution was suppressed. But the liberal nationalists did not stop and advanced liberation, and one of the major issues they advocated was for the freedom of press. The revolutionary acted directly because of the fear of repression. They went underground and formed secret societies. So, they used to train revolutionaries and spread their ideas in secret. Their main motive was to oppose the monarchical forms of government, which came after the Treaty of Vienna. Their motto was to fight for liberty and freedom, and they considered nation state to be quite necessary in the struggle of freedom. One such individual was the Italian revolutionary called Giuseppe Mazzini. He became a member of secret society of the Carbonari. He was later exiled in 1831 for attempting on revolution in Liguria, but he found two more underground societies. First was called Young Italy in Marseilles, and another one was called Young Europe in Bern, which consisted of like-minded members from Poland, France, Italy, and Germany. He believed that the nation was the natural unit of mankind, and he believed that for the Italian liberty, the only way out is when the small state and the kingdom will be unified and made into a single unified republic. His ideas were very influential, and his models were followed in Germany, France, Switzerland, and Poland as well. His ideas were that influential that Metternich described him as the most dangerous enemies of social order. Once again, his ideas were that of influentials, that Metternich described him as the most dangerous enemies of our social order. Metternich was a German diplomat and a statesman and one of the most influential figure of his era. Okay students, that's all for today's class.